Good evening, everyone. My name is Neha Sami. I'm faculty here at the Indian Institute for Human Settlements, and it's my pleasure to welcome all of you to this evening's public talk. We're very excited to have three very interesting speakers, Marie-Hélène Zérah, Khaliq Parkar, and Gaurav Mittal, who will be speaking to us on their work on reimagining and re-understanding how we look at urban digitalization projects and locating this within a longer history of established city-state relationships and neoliberal municipal reforms and a whole host of other sort of urban and regional governance changes that have emerged in contemporary urban interventions. I'll just take a minute to introduce our speakers before I hand it over to them. Marie-Hélène is a senior research fellow at CESSMA at the University of Paris and a senior visiting fellow at the Center for Policy Research in New Delhi here in India. And her research focuses on the role of small towns in India and their urbanization processes and looking particularly at urban energy governance. Khaliq Parkar is a PhD candidate at CESSMA. His doctoral work looks at the transformation that digitalization brings to urban governance, specifically in Bhubaneswar in Odisha. And Gaurav Mittal is a postdoctoral fellow at the Institute for Management and Innovation at the University of Toronto. And he looks at questions of urban governance, mobilities, political economy, and Southern theory, looking particularly at small and medium cities in India. So Marie-Hélène, Khaliq, and Gaurav, over to you. And thank you so much for coming.
Thanks very much, Neha, for this introduction. So should we start or? So Gaurav, if you can maybe, okay, so I will start this presentation, and thanks Neha and the whole IIHS team to have invited to present this paper that we published recently in EPW. This is a paper that the three of us wrote. In fact, the order of authors today is the order of presentation, but this is not the order of the authors. Khaliq Parkar was the main author of this paper, but we present turn by turn. So today it's I'm going to start the presentation and Gaurav is going to go after me, and Khaliq will be there for the discussion. So maybe Gaurav, if you can go to the next slide. So we are going to present you this paper that is an attempt that we did as part of a larger project. This is not very important, this slide, but just to tell you that this paper is one of the outcome of a project which has been funded by the French Agency for Development, which looks at urban governance in India through the prism of the 100 Smart Cities mission, and that many others are part of the discussions and our thinking around the implementation of the smart cities, and in particular for this paper, the process of digitalization of urban governance. So I'm just giving them their name here: Bharati Nakiran, Kanchan Gandhi, Sushmita Roy, who have actually also contributed to this paper through the work that they've been doing. There's been a series of publications. We can move. This is not very important. You can always ask us if you want to have access to some of the work. So just to precise, I'm just going to present the context really of this paper. And according to us, there are three dominant readings in some sense of the Smart Cities mission. Of course, there's more, but these are the dominant ones. I think one of the reading is that the Smart Cities mission is doing somehow the same thing that other urban projects have been doing around the issue of making cities, competitive in terms of their economic background, or actually reproducing the classical planning ways of thinking of the cities and financing classic infrastructure. This is one of the reading, and maybe that reading was actually dominant most probably at the beginning of the Smart City mission. I don't see the slide anymore. So second is to read the Smart City mission very much as a disruptive event in the story of urban reforms. And Iona Data, for instance, has clearly kind of argued that the Smart Cities mission was a form of leapfrogging India towards a digital future. That is one reading, and the second one is the disruption around institutional forms of governance with the rise of the special purpose vehicle, which is an ad hoc form of institution which is created and compulsory for any of the smart cities, somehow in place or working along with the municipal governance. A third reading is focusing much more on the role of the integrated command and control centers, which have been created in all the smart cities, and their potential role in terms of controlling and surveying the city, and also the kind of imbalances or tensions, one could say, between the deployment of digital technologies and the legislation that is lagging behind. And this we can come back in the discussion. Of course, this is very much a hot topic nowadays. So we, in our paper and in the way we read the smart cities, we attempt to understand the idea of disruption, which we think there is a very strong digital turn. And on this, we do agree with the statements and the epistemological posture of Iona Data. But we also are very attentive in our work to the historical institutional trajectories of two kinds, the state-led urban reforms, which have happened since '92, and the decentralization amendment, and of the institutional trajectories of e-governance. And we consider that these three phenomena actually shape the digital futures that we do see enhanced with the smart cities mission. And why I'm saying three and not two is because you will see later, and that is what is to some extent making our framework a bit complicated to actually operationalize, is that state reforms and e-governance reform can have different trajectories if we look at the patterns of, or the tension between centralized and decentralized patterns. Next slide. So before, I wanted to add a few things which are not in the paper, in case some of you have read the paper, which is based on data that CPR has access to, which is really all the projects, the 8,000 projects that the smart cities has been funded. This is not very easy to analyze this data because digitalization is not separate from many other projects, is often inserted in existing infrastructure projects. For instance, if you put smart meters, in a water supply or energy supply system, is it a digitalization project? Is it an energy or water project? But just to mention that there is not so much difference between the below 1 million city and the mid-sized cities in terms of the share of investment into digitalization. But very clearly, the larger cities, the 4 million cities, have spent more on IT and digitalization projects. So we can see a difference according to the size of city. The second point, which is in the next slide, thank you, Gaurav, since you are the one who manages the PowerPoint, is that, as I said, digitalization is clearly a future for Indian cities because we found it spread across sectors. This is just a slide to give you an idea. This is done by Sushmita Ray, who was with us at CPR, and who created a database of all the projects we had access to, looking at projects that required sensors used here as a proxy for digitalization. And you can see that, of course, transport and energy are the two dominating sectors with digitalization project, but it's also there with sanitation, health, tourism, education, environment. So it's spread across sectors. So understanding what is this process and how is this process taking place is very key and concern all of us working on urbanization, whether we work on education, on health, on transport. And therefore, that's why we were trying to find a framework that will be useful for all the work that is going to happen in the next few years in this domain. Next slide. This is also something which is not in the paper, because when I was rereading the paper before presenting it, I realized that we actually don't even define digitalization in the paper. So I wonder, okay, reviewers actually didn't ask us to do it, but I think this is actually what we should start with. And of course, there's no fixed definition, simply because this understanding of the digital and the city is actually cutting across a lot of different literature. There is literature in critical urban studies, there is literature in public administration, there is literature coming from computer sciences, and each of these fields of research tend to look at one aspect or the other. So we need to, each of us, to come with our definition. So I don't want to give a fixed definition, but I want to remind us, at least for us and for our team and for this paper, what we understand, what is digitalization, and what are its expected outcomes. So I first want to signal the boundaries of the term digitalization or digital transformation, and even there can be a difference in the definition of these two terms. Is different from digitizing, which refers really to the fact of moving from analog to digital, because in digitalization there is really the idea that the aim is to optimize provision of services through the insertion or the integration of digital technologies into processes, rules, procedures, modes of service delivery. I think digitalization is also different from e-governance, because e-governance focuses mainly on transforming service delivery through interfaces between the users and the administration. Digitalization go further by automatizing, I think, a number of processes, by defining rules. So it's also different from e-governance. The rationale for digitalization are well known to most of us, but it's always good to remind us of the rationale, because this is when we understand this that we can maybe measure the effects and the outcomes of the digitalization. One is to increase efficiency and reduce errors. A second promise, if you want, of digitalization, it's its ability to increase accountability and increase transparency, and therefore, in some sense, the relationship between state and society. It's also supposed to improve processes and work efficiency, processes in delivering services, but also processes within administration. So these two aspects of improving processes. It's also supposedly providing the possibility of interoperability and the potential of automated decision-making, which is extremely important. And there is also this notion of value. And it's very interesting to realize that when you look at urban literature 10 years ago, the notion of value was not very much there. The notion of value and creation of value really is concomitant or parallel with the rise of digital transformation. And of course, around the creation of value is the idea of data and the potential of collecting data, aggregating data, and using data to improve governance or to create new forms of services. So according to me and to us, digitalization does three things. It reshapes types of services delivered and their uses. It reshapes the practices and the organizational culture within public sector, since we are studying here digitalization within public sector. And it also reshapes the compact between state and society and between state and private sector. So as you understand it, for us, digitalization is not only to understand the processes of insertion of technologies in service delivery, it's also to understand the kind of processes, uses, and practices that it leads to. So we defend a very encompassing vision of digitalization. If I would go even further, I would say it's almost a total social fact, if I want to use most definition of total social fact. So this was not in the paper, but I think it was very important to start and give that context. As I said, in our paper, what we try to do is two things. I mentioned that we looked at trajectories and we realize that when you look at urban reforms, but also when we were doing field work, because this paper is based on field work in different places, and we looked at how digitalization was deployed, we realized that the role of the state was very important. Most of the literature on smart cities has usually focused on city analysis, or at the national scale, and often at the discursive level of the national policy. We think that this is surely not only not enough, it's actually a wrong reading to look at only the national and the city scale. And we argue that the state governments play a very important role in shaping the smart cities. So this is one of the transversal angle of our framework, as you will see later when Gaurav takes over. The next slide, which I think is the last one for me, is that because of that, we decided, when we started the project, we also thought we will look at a number of cities. And increasingly, when we were doing fieldwork, we realized that that was not sufficient. So we decided on picking up 4 states, because they have different regimes. So Karnataka has a traditional centralized decision-making in terms of governance, but in terms of its digitalization legacy, or rather, I would say e-governance, it really had control at the state level through an agency that Gaurav will mention later. Madhya Pradesh, of course, has a long history of decentralization and also did that for its e-governance. Bhubaneswar is more centralized as well, and Punjab is an interesting case you will see later, because it's got both a very centralized pattern in terms of decision making, but at the same time it had a way of rolling out its e-governance in a more decentralized manner. And the next slide is when Gaurav will come and present it. But before he takes over, I just want to say that to study digitalization, we were struggling with various ways of looking at it, and we realized that there are somehow different pillars to look at this digitalization process. One is the kind of infrastructure that is required to put in place various digital solutions. And this is what we have called infrastructuring, and Gaurav will define this much more carefully. The second one, and I don't like now what we wrote in the paper, I would change it, but I leave it at that level, which is that a lot of governance functions are now fulfilled by various types of digital technologies. We wrote platforms in our paper. I think it's, I would change it if I had to write it again today, because platforms kind of hides the diversity of dispositif, which can be web portals, which can be GIS, which can be automated solutions. And this leads to a system of thinking the governance in terms of platformization. But I think this confusion between platformization and platforms should be rethought, and I'm welcoming your thinking on this. And datafication, of course, is the last process. And these 3 pillars, according to us, are able or enabler or kind of lens to read that larger processes of insertion of technologies, but also changes of uses of processes, and even reshaping of compact between state, society, and the private sector. And I leave now Gaurav to present the rest of the paper and our preliminary results.
Thanks, Marie-Hélène. Thank you very much. As Marie-Hélène explained, that it's for us also, this project has been an iterative process. We have written this paper, but we keep questioning ourselves that whether we are clear or not clear about the terms we are using, the concepts we are using. And that's what we, in fact, when we started conceptualizing this paper, which was in during one of our field works in Bangalore, it started with that how do we understand digitalization? And what we noticed is that there are so many overlapping things which are used sometimes in parallel to each other, sometimes They just replace each other without much clarity. So for this, then we thought that if we try to simplify it for a researcher who may not have that much of technical background, technical knowledge about understanding how would we do that, and we came up with this idea of PID. PID means platformization, infrastructuring, and datafication that leads to digitalization. So these are distinct but complementary, interrelated, and overlapping processes, which for us lead to digitalization of cities. So we all know that the ubiquitous role digital platforms play in various domains of contemporary lives. In last 5 to 7 years, we have seen proliferation of literature on platforms, mostly commercial platforms, whether it will be Uber or Airbnb or other platforms. And people have said that we now live in a platform society, or the urbanism is shaped by platforms, so it can be called platform urbanism. O'Reilly has also talked about government as a platform, so how governance functions are being shifted to platform. So from there, we take our definition of platformization, where we see platformization, especially through Smart City Mission and other projects in India, that governance functions are increasingly being fulfilled or transferred to various platforms developed for city or state agencies. So for an example, if you need a birth certificate for your child, previously you will go to the municipality office and you will ask for a birth certificate there. You will file in an application, but now you can do it through your mobile. So that kind of platformization, these kind of governance functions, which are being shifted to platforms. Then the thing is that platformization also needs its own infrastructures towards the back end. So these practices, materials, and settings which provide digital infrastructures to the platforms to be able to function, we call it infrastructuring. And then last is that what do the platforms do? Platforms basically collect data, and they have the analytic ability of understanding the data. And if we think an ideal platform will start predicting the data or predicting the pattern, so that the government can take decisions before things happen. So this collection, utilization of data by administrators or platforms to fulfill governance functions, that is what we call datafication. And for us, we follow this path because at first, these are the platforms which are being imagined, whether it is Smart City Mission or whether outside Smart City Mission. At first, the platforms are being imagined to fulfill the governance functions. Then we think of the infrastructures, what infrastructures will go behind the platformization, and then it leads to datafication, and that is where this particular order of platformization, infrastructuring, and datafication that we follow. Now, what sort of platformizations are happening? As Marie-Hélène said, that digitalization has a longer history than Smart Cities Mission. We see that platformization started happening at least 2 decades ago in Indian governance, especially with the arrival of e-governance platforms. Whether it was in the forms of websites which were being developed in mid-2000s in various cities, or various functions which were being put on internet by the governments. World Bank was one of the earliest proponent of e-governance reforms. It funded various projects in across the states for this. There was also JNNURM, under which e-governance reforms were put in place and platforms were developed. Later, we can see that we are moving to service delivery platforms, more in the sense of, as I said before, something like birth certificate or death certificate if you need, where will you go? You can get these kind of service deliveries through platforms. But with the arrival of Smart Cities Mission, we are seeing that increasingly cities are also opting for service optimization platforms. These are the platforms which have analytic capabilities, and they have the capabilities of optimization of services. One example of this could be ITMS, Integrated Transport Management System, where using sensors and cameras, the system can see that what time the red light should go off and on. They can optimize the employment of signals in the city. All this platformization needs structuring. There are three distinct kind of infrastructures which we think are being deployed. The first is data acquisition infrastructures. These are, you can say, based on sensors or user information through which data is being collected. But then there are backbone infrastructures also in the sense of the networks which are required, in the sense of storage, data storage, where the storage will go, how the storage will be done. And then last is data analytics infrastructure, which is more oriented towards capturing, circulation, and standardization of data. It has predictive capabilities in itself. It can analyze the data and then predict the patterns. But in all this, one thing which we should not be forgetting is that there are a lot of hybrid infrastructures are also being put in place. So any person who is researching on smart cities right now in India would say that most of the money under smart cities is going on roads. Like roads are generally classic infrastructure. So what difference is there? In that, we say that now the focus is towards smart roads, and smart roads are some kind of hybrid infrastructures which actually enable digital infrastructure to be put in place in future if required. The other example of hybrid infrastructure is smart poles, which have sensors, which have cameras, which have displays, which have public addressing abilities, which are being put in place. Then datafication for us has 4 different stages through which it goes through. So first is consolidation of data, where data which is being collected through platforms is consolidated in particular formats, and then formatting and storing of data. Storing of data, as I said, it could be done at the central level or the city level, as I'll talk later. And then the other thing what happens is that cross data linkages are created. How can we read data from transport with data from solid waste management? How can those linkages be created with each other? So these linkages are created in datafication, and then at the end comes analytic solution. That what kind of analysis can be put in place by linking data together, what kind of solutions can be predicted. And these activities lead to the digitalization regimes, which we say, which we observe are different in different places. This slide, I think I'm going to skip for now, but this one you can see in the paper also, where we try to give the examples that how different kind of platformization happens, what kind of activities could be categorized in which kind of platformization or infrastructuring. Now coming to the results from our fields, from our foresights, the first observation which we have is that the platformization happening differently in different city states. At some places like Odisha and Punjab, there is a emphasis towards unification, and this unification is happening through rolling out the Digit platform, which has different names. In Punjab, it is called M-Seva. In Odisha, I forgot. Sorry. No use trying to remember now. But yes, in Odisha also, Digit platform is being unrolled to unify the services. But at the same time, we see in cities that there are parallel platforms being put in place, especially when we see Madhya Pradesh, we can see that cities are unrolling their own platforms, and these platforms are trying to optimize the services. When we look at Mangalore and Karnataka, we can see that the city is trying to build a one touch app. They call it One Touch Mangaluru app, where they are trying to integrate the platforms together. But then the municipal government is running their own parallel platforms, which are the legacy platforms coming from World Bank funded reforms in 2000s and are developed by Karnataka Municipal Data Society, which is the agency which is at the forefront of developing platforms in Karnataka. We also see that there are different individual like service level platforms which are being developed in different cities. Like in this, we would say that Bhubaneswar is at forefront. They have developed an app called Mobus, M-O-B-U-S, which is being used for online ticketing. It can also see positions of the bus. It can predict that at what time the bus will come at what stop. It can also suggest route connections to the passengers, that how can they navigate the public transport scene. It has all these abilities. The similar kind of app is also being developed in Mangalore, but we see that because of the different legacies from the past, and sometimes it can be driven by the government, sometimes it can be driven by outside. The success rates are different because the same kind of app, when Mangalore tried to unroll it, they found that one thing is that the bus services in Bhubaneswar are state-owned. It is easier to bring those bus services to one platform. In Mangalore, bus services are operated by private operators, and these operators had already contracted with a private company called Cello. People in Mumbai may be more familiar with this company for data sharing. So when the government tried to bring in their own app, there was a resistance from the operators, and the operators later agreed to share the data from the Cello app. But then that data is also not extensive. Many buses are not on Cello app. Sometimes the data transfer is not easy between Cello app and the government-sponsored app. Then we also see arrays of digital infrastructures which are being put. There are sensors being put in the forms of traffic poles, hybrid infrastructures. These digital infrastructures have the capabilities of capturing the data, but then we see different standards in these sensors which are being put. For an example, in most of the cases, the environmental sensors which are being put under the smart city mission, and environment departments do not use that data because they don't see that the standard of the data captured by these sensors is up to the mark for them. Then the other thing which we can see, and it has become again ubiquitous with Indian smart urbanism in India, is presence of surveillance camera, which we have seen in all the cities. But then we also see strong variations in networks. For example, states like Karnataka has a very centralized model where KMDS is the agency which is integrating all the command and control center activities in Bangalore from all the cities. Then there is decentralized networks, such as very limited networks in Ludhiana, which is not using any of the sensors, which is just using surveillance cameras in terms of digital infrastructure. And that surveillance cameras also have very decentralized way of functioning instead of being in a command and control center. About datafication, we see that datafication is at a very nascent stage in almost all of the cities. It is also because of fragmented practices of data collection. Cities are still trying to standardize the data. They have not been able to come up with the standards across which they can share data with each other, or even within the city itself. There are no notification of city data policies. City data policies were one of the big things which was supposed to come with Smart Cities mission. It was in the guidelines. But wherever we asked for city data policy, we were informed that these had been framed, but they have not been notified. And for the lack of city data policy, there is no standardization of data. We don't know, in fact, we don't know who owns the data or who can even use the data for any kind of analysis which can be put. Because of this, there is very little progress in sharing and utilization of data. I have already given the example of environmental sensors, that how most of the cities have these environmental sensors, which are capturing the data, but that data is of no use for environment department. And that is why we see, barring again Bhubaneswar, which is slightly ahead of other cities and doing some kind of predictive work, especially when it comes to traffic management. Other cities are lagging much behind in predictive solutions. Same is true for data commodification. Right now, we are not seeing much commodification happening, but as the standardizations take place, platforms like Digit seep into the cities, we can see a future of data commodification in the future. This table, again, I think I'm going to skip. It is in the paper. You can see where we try to synthesize how we see these three different processes unrolling in city-state relationships in the 4 sites which we studied. Now, some observations which we got from our fieldwork is that we can see that at whatever stage the cities are and the states are, just one second. That states and cities are moving towards unified model of urban services delivery. Digit is being rolling out. Digit is rolling out in Punjab and Odisha. I said that in Karnataka, Karnataka Data Society is trying to unify the data analytics capabilities. They have, out of 7 smart cities in Karnataka, 5 smart cities are sending their data to KMDS. They are when we did field work in Bangalore last year, KMDS informed us that they are trying to bring in other cities also into the fold. So this kind of unified model or centralized model of urban service delivery we can see. The other thing we observed is that the service optimization platforms, the platforms which have analytic capabilities and which can optimize the services, are mostly exclusively driven by the Smart Cities mission. It could also be because of the fundings which the cities received, and also the emphasis which were being put by the MAHUA in these fundings towards particular projects, that smart city mission, each spearheading these kind of platforms. But at the same time, the service delivery platforms are more successful than service optimization platforms. And we think that it is to do with the legacies of e-governance reforms, legacies of these platforms being in the city for longer durations. Then we observe that different cities have chosen different platforms, and that is resulting in uneven digital infrastructuring of the cities. In this, we can see that cities like Bhubaneswar, they chose the platforms which heavily rely on sensors. They deployed those sensors in the cities, in their city, and captured the data. But at the same time, cities like Ludhiana in state of Punjab, they only relied on CCTV. And because of this, that different cities have different digital infrastructuring. Then again, unification of urban data is a common feature across states. As I said, that the states and even the center, we see that it's leading towards centralization. We can see platforms like IUDX, Indian Urban Data Exchange, which are also being put into place for this. Then city data practices display certain commonalities across the SPVG and other agencies. And these commonalities are more to do with not having data policies, not knowing who actually owns the data, not knowing who can use this data for any kind of analysis, or what use the analysis will have in service delivery, which is again common across the city. Data monitoring is common in all sites, but it is being done through different means. Cities like Ludhiana, again, data monitoring is done through monitoring the CCTV camera footage. At the same time, Bhubaneswar has more analytical capabilities. It is capturing data through sensors, and it is monitoring that data. It is being put on the platform to analyze the data. Then there are datafication variations in cities which are significantly influenced by platformization and infrastructuring choices. That what kind of platforms are being put in the cities and what kind of infrastructures do the cities have. Again, in this, Bhubaneswar is at forefront, Bhopal and Mangalore are close behind, and Ludhiana is lacking. Concluding thoughts. In this presentation, we presented the commonalities and differences across different smart cities. And we see that these commonalities and differences complicate the idea of models or regimes of digitalization. It shows that there is no one model or one regime of digitalization, but variegated ways that digitalization is taking place in Indian cities. And this digitalization, in some sense, it's messy, it is incomplete, it is not integrated. There are efforts which are being put to integrate this process, but we see that it will take a long time for integration. We also need to be attentive to different variations. We have shown the variation at city-state dual scale in our presentation, but there are other variations. There are variations which can be sectoral variations. Like we can see that transport is one of the foremost sector where digitalization is happening. And there are sectors like education or public health, which are not as much digitalized as other sectors. And we should see these variations when we are trying to observe the city. Finally, this PID framework which we developed, we think that this is a heuristic tool that can be used by researchers to unpack specific digitalization projects. So we are not saying that this is the way to look at the digitalization, but perhaps this frame could be deployed to understand slightly better way how digitalization is happening in Indian cities. Thank you very much for your time, and we look forward to your questions.
Thanks, Gaurav, Marie-Hélène and Khaliq for a really, really interesting presentation. I'd like to encourage folks in the audience to please put in their questions in the Q&A box. But actually, while they get started, I had a couple of questions, if you don't mind, that I would like to ask. And I think that what I wanted to ask was actually something that you couldn't get to in the presentation, but was in the paper, which is actually the question of kind of the rescaling of governance processes across state and city levels, and I mean, it's something that I'm really interested in. I'd like to hear more about sort of what you found in your research on the sort of the evolving and changing nature of relationships between the cities and the states, particularly with the inclusion of a whole range of other non-state actors, including the SPVs, including private actors like consultants, etc. And thinking through a little bit how that has begun to change relationships in urban governance, and what that means for emerging forms of urban governance, particularly for things along, say, industrial corridors, etc., that are being built largely on through this model of planning and governance.
Right. Do you want? Okay, you want to go?
No.
Or?
No, please go ahead. I thought that you were.
I would thanks Neha for the question. This is a question we are grappling with because I think there are different levels to answer the question. One is, interestingly, when you look at the project, and since we wrote the paper, we have now have a larger database of the projects. Interestingly, the smart cities has also allowed cities to make different choices. And you look at the diversity of projects and the range of projects seems to indicate that the smart city project has, contrary to what some have argued, given some agency to the cities. And this is an interesting phenomenon. But in a somehow contradictory way, it has given this agency through the city, through an institution which is not really the city itself, right? Which is through that special purpose vehicle, which is, I mean, I don't know if I need to go into details. I think a lot of the people who are in the audience know about the special purpose vehicle, but which is an ad hoc institution located somehow as a bridge between the state and the municipality, because they are representative of the state. Sometimes the SPV is itself headed by a state government representative, sometimes as a city government representative, and also has members of, sometimes the transport board, the energy, or the water board, and which is supposed to be a kind of horizontal and vertical coordination instrument in some sense. And often this decision is taken by the SPV. So as others has shown, and Uttara, I think, is in the audience, the relationship between the SPV and the ULB defines whether this agency that we can see on the ground comes from the state or actually comes from the city. And the results are very diverse. I mean, it depends really from one case to another, even though very clearly there is a form of control by the state of what is going on. And if you look more carefully at the digitalization process, that we have analyzed only through one angle here, and I can come back to this later, very clearly around the issues with data storage, kind of infrastructure you build to be able to develop or to deploy much more intensive tools using data. There is a very strong attention that the state is giving to what is happening. It can take various levels of re-centralization at the state level and even further at the national level. But this is happening, I think, all over the case studies. So that's my reading. I don't know if Gaurav or Khaliq have another one. But so I would say that, again, I mean, it's a bit complicated to say that it's more complex than giving one direction. But very clearly, there are different tensions that are at play. And they play differently if you look at the ability of the city to propose projects, but at the same time, a very strong attention that the state are giving to what is happening in the city.
Khaliq, Gaurav, would you like to add to that? Or?
I'll just chip in a bit here. I think one more thing is that, of course, the cities got agency in decisions, but then again we have to understand the role of different agencies which played in selection of the projects. Like in Karnataka, it was very clear for us that a lot of the projects which were being selected were driven by KUIDFC, Karnataka Urban Infrastructure Development Agency. So they were playing. They have the history of playing an important role in deciding what kind of projects the cities will take, and it continued with Smart City. We were also told that, especially the digitalization projects, that Mahua had a list of the projects which were actually prescribed to all the cities, and a lot of times they would have the agency to select the projects, but then they have the limited choices. They will have 12, 14 projects. Out of this, they have to choose 5, 6 projects. So in that sense also, some of the projects, some of the directions was top driven, even if the cities had agency.
Yeah, and I forgot to mention, you mentioned it, Neha, of course, the role of consultant, which is much stronger in the smart city than most probably in previous governance projects, more than in JNURM or more than in AMRUT, actually, as well. Of course, that played a big role in the smart city mission.
Khaliq, since you didn't present in the main presentation, is there something you'd like to add?
Yeah, I mean, in one way, the special purpose vehicle becomes the mode through which these projects are designed, installed, implemented, largely because at the city agencies, it's always said there are no capacities to do this. And so it's faster for the SPV to hire its vendors, its contractors, its integrators, as they are called, to build all of these technologies together and implement them. And just to sort of add a little bit to the point that Marie-Hélène made is about historically, states have created data centers. There are all of these states, you will see some form of state level data body per se. But in the smart cities mission, we see like that there are certain instances like Karnataka where state control is very strong in sort of getting all of this together, or in Odisha, that the case may be. But in other instances, cities are having their own data centers. Cities are still sort of maintaining their own data through the SPV. So there are scalar ways in which these new institutions are also handling this centralization. One is of technology, the other is that of data.
I actually find that really very interesting, because I think the narrative almost is that, cities have very little agency, and that, a lot of the power is concentrated either at the regional or at the state level. And actually, I was going to come back to what Marie-Hélène said earlier also, is that some of your findings showed that it's been giving cities more agency through these projects. And I'd love to hear more about sort of what you found, particularly given that, most of my work is focused on Karnataka, and there's a lot of centralization at the state level here. And it'd be really interesting to hear other examples that you might have found.
Odisha is definitely one case where that sort of centralization is very visible. This is both, we see that, so for instance, even as the smart cities mission is going on in Bhubaneswar, the Odisha Urban Department and the Odisha Ministry for Urban Affairs has already sort of created e-governance programs for the rest of the state. And so even as Bhubaneswar is going through its own digitalization projects, all the other 114 ULBs are also turning to Sujog, which is a reformulation of Digit that's taking place. And this is something that's taken from the state level. And as we said earlier, that in many of these instances, the fact that SPV boards are constituted largely of state level officials also shows that sort of need to have a control or need to determine the future of a city from the state level. And this is not true only for capital cities, it's also true for other smaller cities, like in the case of Mangalore, etc.
So if there's no further questions from the audience, then oh, there is one. I think there's some. Kanika wants to know how Karnataka is centralizing more and what kinds of parameters are being indicated. And then Lalita has a follow-up question on how you can comment a bit more on how state and society relations are changing. If any of you would like to.
I think on the platform and Karnataka, I will leave Gaurav and most probably Khaliq to answer, but very clearly in Karnataka, apart from, if I remember, I think it's Belgaum, which had created its ICCC before the others. All the storage, all the data is stored in Bangalore, and there is only one master system integrator, which is actually dealing with the data produced in the various cities of Karnataka. So there is the very strong rationale that now this data which exists, which is not file, which is not paper, which is just 0 and 1s, can be actually located in one place, and that place can be Bangalore, and that can be managed by the state itself. But I think maybe Gaurav and Khaliq can add to that. On the question of Lalita on, if I'm right, on how it changes state-society relationship, I think it's a good question which we don't answer in this paper, because when I presented what we understand by digitalization, which is also actually processes, uses, and practices, it is true that in the paper we don't go into these aspects of of these very key aspects of digitalization, right? We've looked more at how the technologies are referring to different processes and are deployed. But these are very important aspects. We have not dealt with in it in the paper, but I think there are various ways in which it reshapes. For instance, through the idea that there is less errors and only one way to be accountable for the state. For instance, if you look at grievance redressal system, if it's all automatized, then you can just fill your grievances through portals, and the other ways are kind of dismissed, for instance, going to your counselor or going through other ways. It creates a certain rational or idea of accountability. And of course, it has strong implication in terms of justice and inclusion. So I think it will reshape very differently. And our argument in other papers is that we look at it, we need to look at it sector by sector. So for instance, when we looked at solid waste management in Bangalore, very clearly the introduction of digital apps to trace solid waste collection also is changing the relationship with labor, because your way of monitoring labor becomes almost also a tool of surveillance of labor. So there are various ways in which it can shape. And another thing is I think it's also shaped even the perception that agents of the state have of their work and therefore of their relationship to society. This we have not explored, but I think this is one area which we need to look much further, which is how the digital transformation is also transforming the way of working, the processes within the municipal corporations. For instance, by Khaliq can talk about this, and I will let him talk about it. For instance, the way building plans can be automated, totally transform the relationship that someone has with the planning process, for instance. So different ways, different sectors, and I think kind of most probably creating increasingly less inclusive access to the state. But maybe Gaurav, Khaliq, you want to add on that? And we'll take the next question later about private finance. We'll talk about it later.
Sure. Khaliq, do you want to go first?
Yeah. I mean, even as the Smart Cities mission began, there was this entire discourse of using public participation to decide what projects or what sectors of governance should be transformed. And from very early on, we see that this sort of public engagement with determining projects for the city was very scanty. And even after, once you start having these digitalization projects, and as Marie-Hélène said, once you transfer these interactions that you would have with officials or you would have with representatives onto platforms, the way that the access to municipal agencies, municipal processes, formal or informal, clearly change. One example is typically, I saw this in Odisha, in Bhubaneswar, is when somebody would go to a municipal office, they would say, this is no longer done by us, so go and talk to the smart city, because they are the ones who have designed the platform. They will tell you why this error is showing up. And so the conventional way of understanding why your proposal was rejected or why your application is rejected or is not going through is no longer being accessible through your conventional methods. And therefore this ambiguous space of the platform or the smart city is where the answer lies. Yeah, Gaurav?
Yeah, so I think Khaliq and Marie-Hélène have answered Lalita's question. I will not get into that. I wanted to tell Kanika that in Karnataka, most of the things happen through KUIDFC. That is the agency. We were, in fact, told that. Sorry, Neha, I was reading the question. Anyway, okay. So we were in fact told that Karnataka is one of the 2 or 3 states which has state level nodal agency for smart cities. So all the projects which are being selected by the smart cities in Karnataka have to go through KUIDFC. So that is the centralization which we were talking about. But at the same time, we also see that Bengaluru is outside this centralization. So Bengaluru, when it comes to urban development department, also in Karnataka, it's a separate line, Bangalore city. So Bangalore city does not come under KUIDFC or KMDS in the hierarchy. It is separate. So that's what we observed, that Bengaluru has its own ICCC, which is not integrated with KMDS ICCC. But other cities, other than Belgavi, because they had rolled out the infrastructure before, it could be centralized. Other 5 cities have their ICCC located in KMTS. Yeah.
Who wants to take up the question of Matt on private finance? I think it's it's a difficult question. I'm not sure I can answer that, Matt. I think there are again, there would be different level of looking at this. If you look maybe at, and I'm not sure, I'm thinking you've worked on this as well, so I don't know if you can speak, maybe not, but I think in terms of the funding of the projects of the smart cities, actually, they're not too much of PPP. Actually, the promise that it would lead to a lot of private investment in project is not really very major, especially when it comes to infrastructure building, right? But around the idea of value, creation of value, there is very clearly, I think, and it's not yet highly visible, at least for me, maybe more for Khaliq or Gaurav, the idea that you can create new business model with public data. And very clearly, some cities are trying to work around this. Srinagar is doing so with using polls, using some automated decision that they've tried to put in place. They are trying to sell their model, for instance, to other cities. So there are different ways of creating business models that are most probably in the making. Now, they are not highly visible, but for instance, smart poles, where you kind of franchise access to public infrastructure to be used by private operators, or new models that never existed in urban governance. So this is not necessarily private sector funding projects specifically for the cities, but there's the idea that the city is going to be a source of new business model. But I'm not sure whether these business models are highly visible, but maybe Khaliq has more to say on this.
Yeah, I mean, an interesting case is that of Bhopal, where the smart poles and the fiber optic connectivity for the smart city was set up by a telecom operator. And the idea was that these fiber optic networks would help connect the digital infrastructures of the city, but also these would be used, therefore, by the private operators to roll out their 5G networks. And this has sort of led to this leasing model where it leases out bandwidth on the fiber optic in order to make money for the city. And that's sort of one project that has been around. But as Marie-Hélène said, even though public-private partnerships were spoken about in the original guidelines, we don't really see these quite extensively in most of the cities.
Yeah, I'll just add to what Khaliq said, that that was also, we observed that one of the purposes of making SPVs, making them for-profit companies, was that they will become in time self-sustainable. They will be able to generate their own revenues, and through those revenues, they will be able to unroll more projects. And that is what we see is not happening. Most of the SPVs were not able to generate any of the revenues from private sector, and I mean that is the reason that the model seems slightly unsustainable right now. A lot of people are talking about that what happens to the SPVs once the smart city rolls up. So that is what has happened. That there has been very little private sector investment, whether in terms of the projects, but also the monetizing, which expected. It's more in papers instead of generating any revenues for SPVs right now.
In fact, I don't know, but if one would want it to be provocative, you could almost reverse the idea by saying that public money is pumped into smart cities, but a lot of it goes to consultancy firm, and that actually, in some sense, the public is actually funding the private. This is a bit far-fetched to say that, but and we know that the debate around large contracts of consultancy firm is not only limited to India nowadays. There's lots of controversies around the role that private sector played, for instance, in COVID strategies all over the world, etc., etc. So,
there's one last question from Lalita, although I know we're a little bit over time, but if you guys want to take a couple of minutes and just answer that before we close.
Maybe I can go first. Yeah, so for us, yes, it was not just the legacies of e-governance, but also broader governance and political culture of different states, what we could observe. But again, we think that the legacies of e-governance are also connected to that. For example, places like Punjab had very decentralized e-governance rollouts. The cities created their own websites. They created their own apps under the e-governance reforms too. And right now also we see that everything is decentralized, and perhaps that is also one reason that in none of the cities in Punjab took up sensor-based digitalization as part of Smart Cities mission. At the same time, places like Odisha, which had this legacy of centralized unrolling of e-governance reforms, or even the political culture, a lot of things are decided in Bhubaneswar in Odisha. So we can see that some kind of coherence in rolling out even digital platforms which are being enrolled in smart cities, or even let's say that the smart city platforms which are unrolled are taken up by the state government and are being unrolled in other cities which are not smart cities. So we can see that happening in Odisha. So definitely, yes, it has broader governance and political culture at work here, but we see e-governance reforms also the legacy of the same culture, not separate.
Well, yeah, I agree with you, Gaurav, but it can be contradictory in some sense, because, for instance, the case of Punjab is also a very, very highly centralized decision-making. So it's a strange contradictions, and that's why it's not so easy to define or to put all the states in one box, because even though it can be decentralized in terms of the solution that city has chosen, in fact, the manner in which these projects are implemented have to go through a very highly centralized process. And that plays into what Iona has called speed urbanism, which at the beginning I was kind of confused. I was wondering what she was saying, but very clearly there's different pace, right? So you can have a centralized vision, or if you want a unifying vision, which still leaves some space for decision-making happening more at the local scale. So your vision can be technologically centralized, but actually at the same time, from a governance point of view, you leave some leeway to the cities or to the SPVs that actually accelerate the process. In Punjab, you have a system where you actually leave the city choose somehow the solutions, because it's made in an ad hoc manner, sometimes driven by consultants. So it decentralized in terms of the solutions that are chosen, but actually the decision-making process is highly centralized, and actually explain also the pace of reforms, which is much different in Punjab as compared to, for instance, Odisha or Karnataka for that matter. So I'm not sure, it plays in it plays in governance processes, and it plays in choice of technology and e-governance. That's why we were saying that there are two different legacies and work culture and political culture that need to be looked at when we look at digitalization. And it makes it a bit more complicated, I think, than looking at infrastructure.
Great. Thank you all very much. And thank you all to the audience for coming and participating. And we'll see you all at the next public talk in a week or so. Thank you.